Hello and welcome to The Y Word. My name's Ian Hawkins. This is the podcast that gets under the skin of the people that are changing the world and finds out why they do what they do. Coming up on the programme, you're going to hear this.
When I look back, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because although we were all children once, we're not a child in today's world. So it's quite easy sometimes for us to put our experiences and I guess wisdom to where we are now onto young people. Because I completely lost confidence. And actually, it was the Beijing Paralympics completely deserted me the night before the semi-finals. And I genuinely didn't believe I was capable of going out there and delivering. And luckily I turned it around. But I just had this light bulb moment and realised that if I'd have gone out there convinced I was going to lose, I would have done. It's not something that you pick and choose at. Your whole life revolves around it. So I didn't know who I was away from the bows and the arrows. And it was just so hard. But yeah, loads of athletes struggle with this. I think in terms of mental health, there are so many problems when athletes do leave sport, whether they're supported or not.
Today's guest became the first Paralympian to represent England in an able-bodied event at the Commonwealth Games. Today, her trophy cabinet is groaning with World Championship titles, cups, medals, and an MBE. Danielle Brown, welcome to the Y Word.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So tragically unsported, because I know nothing about sport and I know nothing about archery. So what is the training regime for an archer?
Archery is a skill sport, and effectively, honestly, it sounds like the most boring thing in the entire world because effectively you're trying to do the same thing every single time. You know, it's about achieving that perfection in your shot. So over and over again, just trying to get that same shot. It involves a lot of time, a lot of training on getting that bit right. But I suppose the whole thing around that, you know, everything goes into sport. It's not something you pick and choose at. So, you know, your whole mental state, what you eat, when you go to bed, how often you socialise, everything goes into that.
Is it a solitary sport or is there a team element to it?
There's both. I mean, it mainly is individual, but there are team elements at some of the major tournaments. So, you do both, it was quite cool and quite interesting in many ways because your competitors then became your teammates. One moment you're sort of fighting against them for medals, and then the next you're working together to achieve medal together.
We talk a lot in business about a work-life balance. As an athlete, did you get a work-life balance?
I was rubbish at it. Absolutely shocking. I mean, I did a law degree whilst I was training, and honestly, it was so hard. Early training, then I'd be studying, and literally the only time I got to myself was when I was sleeping. It was just literally bouncing from one thing to the other. When I started training full-time, I got a bit more of a balance, as in I had slightly more free time, but most of it was all consumed by sport. And I actually found this so difficult when it came to London 2012 Olympic year, you know, because you couldn't escape from it. You'd go home, you'd turn the TV on, it was all Olympic ads. You'd go to the supermarket, everything's branded up with the Olympic rings. So it was just no getting away from it. So that was really, really tough, actually.
I've got to ask you this, because you did the law degree. This is going to sound rude, and it comes from a good place, I promise you. I have a degree, but I always said I'm not very good at my subject. I'm just really good at passing exams. Now, you're teaching young people about how to do exam skills. Do you think you're good at law? Or are you just really good at passing exams?
Absolutely passing exams, you know, and this sounds really bad, but in terms of my degree, I decided which questions were coming up in the exam. I pre-wrote the answers out. I'm very, very good at memorising, and I just regurgitated it in the exam, and I could have been totally screwed if I hadn't have got it right. But in terms of, I spent so much time in my degree playing with bows and arrows that was what I had to do in that situation. So it's not something I would advise young people to do at the minute, but I think an exam effectively is a hoop. Once you understand what that hoop is, once you understand where you've got to jump through, then it's easy to deliver. And it's all about that performance side of things, I suppose.
Worth asking, because you do have is it a course that you teach children about? It's certainly books, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got some course, Your Journey to Success for Young People. So we do a lot around exam performance. We've got a bit on mental health. And we've also got a general one, sort of figuring out who you are, what you want to do, building your self-confidence.
Well, let's think about those books, because do you not feel sometimes that we push kids to do too many exams? And how do you feel as someone that's in that journey, pushing people through exams? Does it feel like we test children too much?
I think exams are pretty much a really rubbish indicator of how you're doing. You know, I think it depends. Really, it just assesses how good you are under pressure, whether you're good at remembering things, how you interpret a question and how you answer it. So really, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think it sort of marks down or sort of assesses a person's full skills. And I certainly know when I look back, I always say that my biggest teacher was sport. And I think the most valuable lessons I actually learned were all the practical ones that sport taught me that I use now compared to what I learned to pass an exam. So I think, children are tested far too much, and I don't think it is necessarily the best system in the world. And I suppose even here in the UK, we've got a very, I guess the curriculum, it's like a mile long, but only an inch deep. So what children and what young people are actually learning, I don't necessarily know how valuable that is.
Do you think the legal world has been saved from Danielle Brown, lawyer?
Do you know, I think I really, really got the benefit of through sports. I finished my degree, I moved to the training centre and trained for 2 years full time. And in that period, all my friends that did the degree, they'd gone on, they were doing the training contracts and further courses. And it was quite interesting having that step back and seeing what they were doing, because just watching that kind of reaffirmed that probably wasn't the route for me. But yeah, the world is probably being saved from that.
What sort of law did you do?
So I just did a generic law degree. So I got to specialise in a few modules, which I really enjoyed. The medical law, which that was fascinating, and political theory. They were really, really fun. But I didn't sort of specialise or take it any further from there.
There's an element to your books as well about mental health, and I just wanted to go into that a little bit. Do you think that mental health has become more of an issue for young people because mental health problems are getting worse, or do you think it's just something we're noticing a lot more?
I think there's a bit of both to it. I think it's something that we do notice more, but I do think the situation's getting worse. And I think when I look back, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because although we were all children once, we're not a child in today's world. So it's quite easy sometimes for us to put our experiences and I guess wisdom to where we are now onto young people. But I think with young people, I think in so many ways it's a lot harder. You know, there's no escape. They go home because of things like social media, because the world is connected in a completely different way. They've got a whole host of other additional challenges.
And so what sort of advice are you giving young people about their mental health?
In terms of mental health, for me, I think that if you look at our physical health, there are so many things that we can actually do to proactively improve it, so that we know if we do exercise, if we eat the right things, if we sleep well, hydrate ourselves, we're taking steps to actually improve our physical health. And I think mental health should be approached in the same way. You know, it tends to be spoken at the minute when things go wrong. You know, when people are diagnosed with conditions, and actually there are so many things that we can do to either improve where we are and stop us from actually getting to that position in the first place. So for me, a lot of it is about working with the individual, working with the person, getting to know yourself, getting to understand yourself. And once you've got that self-awareness, then we can actually start building on top of that. And working on strategies that proactively looks after you as a person, which then sort of, you know, holistically looks after everything, you know, your performance, your physical health, everything's so interconnected.
You talk about performance, and just to bring you back into something you said earlier about the training was a bit boring and repetitive. Did you find that the mental process of having to go through that was helpful, or was part of the challenge you had to overcome?
I actually found it really easy, and I think that's because I was so passionate about it. Archery, I guess, is one of those sports that when I first started, I didn't even realize it existed outside of medieval history or fairy stories. It was unusual. And as soon as I picked up a bow, that very first moment, it was just the most fun thing I'd ever done. And I was so passionate about it, and that passion never really died. So I was always quite hyped to go training. I mean, sure, there were days where motivation dipped slightly, especially if I did have a bit of a drop in performance. But because I started to progress and I was setting myself goals and I knew exactly what I wanted to achieve, and I knew that the training would help me get there, I didn't actually find it so bad. And I think because even though, it is that repetitive side of things, there are ways you can make it more interesting. So looking at motivators, I'm really motivated by competition. So we'd set ourselves little challenges in training with training partners, or whether it was to hit a certain score or get a certain number of arrows shot. So even though I was doing the same things, I was always building in those little motivators to make sure I kept on track.
And that's quite a useful way to sort of mini motivators. That's quite a useful way of keeping you on to see a bigger goal, yeah?
Absolutely.
In terms of performance, so you talk about your own performance and you help other speakers do improve their speaking skills and getting kids to go through exams and hitting that mark on that particular day. What is it that you think holds people back from achieving that? That very time-sensitive moment?
Confidence, 100%. I think, and I know this from my experiences, completely lost confidence. And actually, it was the Beijing Paralympics completely deserted me the night before the semi-finals. And I genuinely didn't believe I was capable of going out there and delivering. And luckily, I turned it around. But I just had this light bulb moment and realised that if I'd have gone out there convinced I was going to lose, I would have done. So for me, from that point, I stood on the podium. It was cool getting the medal, but I just had this light bulb moment. And it was just sort of this like complete moment of realisation where I was like, if you don't believe in yourself, you're going to lose. And it was about understanding what confidence was, how you can trust yourself and your ability. And I invested a lot of time into that, into actually understanding what confidence was, how to become it. And I think with young people, or with all people, it is about instilling that confidence, that belief. We're all capable of achieving great things, but that self-belief, you've got to have that in order to drive that forward.
Oh, yeah, but we're also British, aren't we? And sometimes it's very difficult to convincingly say, I am capable of achieving these great things.
I know. And you know what? I hate that excuse. People use that excuse so many times. They'll say, yeah, that's all very well and good, but it's not the very British approach. And it's like, it doesn't matter if it's not a British approach. It's an effective approach. So, yeah, I think that there is obviously a complete different line between being confident and being arrogant. But yeah, it is it's definitely some resistance there.
Danielle Brown, your top tips. The pressure is on. The world is against you. All the things that you thought you'd set up are not going to work quite as well as you thought they were. What is your tip for managing to do a good performance when things are not necessarily going your way?
Breaking it down. So I think what happens is when something goes wrong, the first thing that happens is your mind kind of runs off with you. And, it might be that you start catastrophizing. It could be one thought. In Beijing, I had a one what if. And before I knew it, that one what if had spiraled out of control. And there I was, end of the world scenario. So what it is, it's about stopping it before it gets to that point. So bringing it all back to perspective. And I actually find it quite helpful to write things down, really, really therapeutic to actually get it out of your head and onto paper. And it turns out what is usually quite a big issue into something that's actually manageable. And you can look at the actions you can then take to either mitigate it or fix it if things are going wrong.
Danielle seems to have lived this life where she wasn't intending to get into a sport professionally, and then suddenly she was. And she was also doing a proper law degree, proper grown-up stuff, and then she wasn't doing that. And there was one other big change that was coming along that I wanted to talk to her about. But as she speaks, think about something that could change in your life and totally throw you, because that's kind of what happened to Danielle. I'll ask the question. let's talk about this moment that you started off as a Paralympian and then you were, what's the word, declassified? You became, yeah, so you had to compete in the able-bodied versions of the sports.
Yeah, so actually as a para-athlete, I was already competing as an able-bodied, and I think that was one of the things I guess I loved about archery, is that it was so inclusive to start with, that it doesn't matter if you've got a disability or not. Everybody tends to compete together at a domestic level. Internationally is the only time really where you're separated into disability events and able-bodied. But 2010, I kind of shocked the world and shocked myself by making the able-bodied team. So I was actually out at a para tournament, got my selection scores for the Commonwealth Games, and got through the selection event. So I was competing with the able-bodied team for 3 years before my declassification.
And how did that feel? That change, was it a shock? Was it a challenge, or was it fine?
Yeah, the declassification was a complete shock. After London 2012, they decided to change the rules for classification. So every para-athlete has to be classified to determine whether their disability is severe enough. And I'd always passed with flying colours, which is kind of a bittersweet moment. You know, it's like, yay, the door's open, I can go to the Paralympics, but I really didn't realise I was that bad. So it was always quite difficult, but under the new rules I didn't pass, and it was quite harrowing and humiliating. They were pushing and pulling my feet round. I've got chronic pain in my feet. I was screaming, and the next day I learned that I'd failed, and that was it. My Paralympic career was over. And even though I had competed with the able-bodied team, because my discipline is in the Paralympics but not the Olympics, so I could go to Commonwealth Games, World Championships, World Cups, it wasn't funded. So I went from being a fully funded athlete, it was my full-time job, to being thrown out. I didn't have an income. I wasn't allowed to train at the training centre anymore. I had to find a new career, a new job. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And yeah, I could still compete with the able-bodied, but I had to pay for the privilege. And yeah, it does get really expensive to travel the world. And when you don't have an income, it was really, really tough. So I continued it for a couple of years whilst I was setting up my business. And I just found a new passion in doing what I'm doing, and that took over.
So your new business, what was it that you decided to do rather than, presumably not the law?
No, I decided I didn't want to do law, and I thought it was so difficult as well. You know, as I said, I didn't have an income. I got a mortgage to pay. I had to go and find something straight away, and going back to study just wasn't feasible at the time, and that wasn't where my passion lay. I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, my full-time job of being an athlete, it was what I was passionate about. I was planning on going to Rio, and I didn't want to start at the bottom of a company and try and work my way up, because I think that would have just been soul-destroying. So I decided to set my own business up, which was about teaching people the skills I'd learned through sport, so through speaking and through training and coaching.
But this is something that every athlete has to do, isn't it? Because they know that their time competing is really quite finite, and you might retire when you're still in your 20s. So is this something that you find a lot of this goes on in the athletic community?
It's a huge problem in sport, actually, and they are starting to do more. I mean, when I declassified, I was given a piece of paper on how to write a CV, and that was literally all the support I was given. I was given 4 months of my funding. Off you go, have a good life. So it is really tough. And even athletes who choose to come out, because I guess your whole identity is around sport, because as I was saying before, it's not something that you pick and choose at. Your whole life revolves around it. So I didn't know who I was away from the bows and the arrows. And it was just so hard. But yeah, loads of athletes struggle with this. I think in terms of mental health, there are so many problems when athletes do leave sport, whether they're supported or not. So, but we are getting better. We are seeing a lot more positive movements, positive change in that way. And governing bodies are now encouraging people to think about the career and think about what life after sport looks like, which wasn't prioritised when I was competing. So,
did you find that the skills you'd learned as an athlete helped you get over that shock of being declassified and having to find your own way?
Yeah, I mean, it was so hard, and actually, somebody sort of pointed out, or one of my mentors, that I went through the whole cycle of grief. And, you know, when it first happened, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it took me 5 years to get a diagnosis with my condition. And my very first trip to London was actually to Great Ormond Street Hospital at 16 years old, where I finally got a label for this condition, because doctors didn't understand what it was. So I just thought that these physios hadn't a clue. So I protested and appealed the decision. You go through all these big emotions, but I think the strategies and I guess the tools that you learn as an athlete really, really helped. And once that, I guess, those emotions were able to be pulled in and reined in, and you sort of understood them a bit better, it was then easy to come up with an action plan to take you forward.
Were you always a sporty kid?
Yeah. You know, I love sport, but I was so rubbish at them. You know, I've got 2 younger sisters. They both used to beat me when we were running. I used to do swimming. Honestly, I could never swim fast enough to get my silver award. Kayaking, I got a certificate to achieve more swimming than canoeing. So yeah, love sport, tried every single one I could, but it was just a hobby. It was never ever going to be a career.
Do you feel sorry for me as a non-sporty person? Do you think I just never found the right sport when I was growing up?
Absolutely. I think that there is a sport for everybody. And to be fair, you know, in terms of sport and non-sporty, I hate watching sport. People really, really struggle to sort of reconcile that. I cannot think of anything worse than sitting inside and watching sport on the TV. Like, I love to be out there doing things, but I think it's just a case of trying loads of different things, figuring out what you like and what you're good at. And there are just so many different sports out there. It's yeah, I love trying them, but I've only ever found one that I've been pretty decent at.
Well, pretty decent is a bit of an understatement. I found myself being absolutely brilliant at downhill ambling, but only if the climate is right.
I love it.
But okay, I've seen some of the feedback from your speeches. You're a wonderful speaker. People really get a lot from what you do, and you add so much to. I think you sort of go beyond motivational, that little label, because you're not just a motivational speaker. You actually have quite a lot that you bring in as well. And I just wonder if you're now finding that giving these speeches is giving you the same rush that you used to get from the competitions.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I love speaking, because when you're out there, you've got to be perfect. There's no hiding. You've got to deliver. And I just love the challenge of just being out there, and I do get that adrenaline rush, which is amazing, and very, very similar to sport. You know, there's all that prep work that goes into it, and if you do the prep right, you're going to be able to perform well on the day. So there are so many crossovers, but I absolutely love being out there, and in many ways it just feels so much better when you get that good bit of feedback at the end, or you hear that it's really, really helped somebody, or they're going to take the strategies that you've given and implement them in a way that sort of helps make a difference to their lives.
Fab. This is my last question, and it is about the dinner party game, Danielle. You have to have somebody for a business lunch. Has to be business, has to progress your career in some way. They can be alive, they can be dead, they can be fictional or real.
Right.
Danielle Brown, who would you have for your business lunch?
I think I would love to have lunch with Michelle Obama. I just think she is so inspiring, and she always seems to come across so positively as well. You know, I just think I think there are so many people out there that you can learn things from, but I think she's got so much to say. I think she's got an amazing value base, and I'd love the opportunity to learn from her.
You're my second guest to say Michelle Obama, so I will let you have a spare in case Michelle is tied up with my other guest.
I'd go with Yusra Mardini. I think she just has an amazing story. She in Rio was on the refugee team, but she came from Syria, and she walked to Germany from Syria, and she managed to get onto sort of while she was in the refugee camp there, the Germans found out she liked swimming, and she was training full time, and she managed to make it to the Olympics. So yeah, it's just an incredible story, and her autobiography is absolutely amazing. And I was just so amazed with how she had a dream and what she went through in order to make that dream come true. And her perseverance, her resilience and tenacity is just, well, it's inspiring, but just so much to learn there. I think will be incredible.
Well, if you ever do get to have lunch with her, tell her that there's always a spot open on the Y Word for her to join us. Danielle Brown, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
If you'd like to make any comments on the show, please do find me on LinkedIn. That's where I love to communicate with people. And if you have anybody in mind for a guest on an upcoming show, someone that's changed the world in some way, could be big, could be small, could be kind of random, by all means, do put us in touch with one another and we'll see where we go. If you haven't already, do check out the archive. We've had some fantastic guests. Hit that subscribe button. My name's Ian Hawkins. Have a great time. Till the next time.